The first reading talks about creation. And this is the creation story that we hear about, but it's been revised. The original creation story went something like this. God went to Adam and said, Adam, I'm going to create for you a companion, but I need something from you in order to create this new person. This shows your sacrifice in order for me to make the companion. And so he says, what is it you're looking for in a companion? And he says, I want someone who will adore me, someone who will love me, someone who will wait on me hand and foot, someone who looks at me and I can do no wrong. What's that going to cost? And God said, that'll cost you an arm and a leg. So Adam looks up at God and says, well, what can I get for a rib? And that's the story that we hear today. So even there we see the roots of something that I think really is the root sin. A few months ago I talked about greed as the root sin, and everything goes to greed. We cling to things that we have no right to have, and that's sin. But I think something else plays in that. It's the reason for greed. There's a book called The Metamorphoses of Ovid. It's a wonderful book. Now, it's all mythological, granted, but they're great stories. And Metamorphoses in itself says change. So all these stories from ancient Roman mythology and Greek mythology are about humans that have physically changed their form. But the irony is that before the humans changed their form, whether they became a plant or animal or whatever else, their heart changed. Their heart changed first, and then their physical appearance. And there is one such story in there about this young man. And this young man was so good looking that he played everyone. He played everyone, he used his looks and his charms. And so the gods decided to punish him. And one day they had him come near to this pool, and he bent over to get a drink of water, and he finally saw his reflection. And he fell in love with his reflection. He couldn't leave the sight, his image. And all he did was write, think of all this poetry to describe his own image. He could look at nothing else. And so, as legend, as myth holds, Narcissus, or in the classical Narcissus, eventually became a flower. That he just took root there and became a flower. He changed his form. But we have a modern day word that comes from this myth. It's called narcissism. And narcissism means that I am the center of the universe. That everyone, as that original story of Adam and Eve, everyone should worship me. Everyone should cater to me. That in the terms of a modern day cliche, it's all about me. And I believe this is the root sin. We see this, just to talk about common examples, especially since today in the gospel, Jesus is talking about marriage. We see this in weddings all the time. There is a reason why, they can have a reality show about brides. And there is a reason why you have terms like bridezilla and the like. Because in this day and age, when people get married, it is about their day. It is about their wedding. And the problem that comes about is, we don't often see if the person is all about them for this celebration, that's not just going to be for the wedding. That will bleed into the marriage and will make itself known throughout that time. Just last year, I put out a new dress code for brides. So if you have a bride coming up, just so you know it, that there's no strapless dresses. We can't have it, And if they have a strapless dress, because I understand it's an investment, we're going to get these nice little shawls that they can cover themselves. Because if they're getting married in the church, the most important thing is right here. And we've forgotten that. I noticed this also with the photographers. who really care only about getting the picture, and to their credit, that's their job. They need to get the picture. But they will disrupt the solemnity of a service to get the picture. And so we see this disregard. What it says is the center attraction are these two people. That's the center attraction. God has kind of been left out of the equation. We saw this especially true, and this has happened since the middle of the last century, where people don't get married in the church. And a priest just came up from Florida, and he said, "Do you have these destination weddings?" I never heard of it before, thank goodness. But he said in Florida, the latest craze is people are getting married in exotic areas. And so they're just going out. Well, what you do then is you put a burden of your family and friends to get plane tickets and go to these areas to share in this celebration. Again, we see that narcissism in there. That it's not about God, it's not about others, it's about me. And so when we look at marriage in the true sense of the word, it has to be totally the opposite of narcissistic. It has to be giving. It means that I am no longer number one anymore. That I am number 2 or 3 or 4, etc. But one thing you think that it couldn't possibly touch, I see it in funerals as well. You think with funerals you're pretty safe. You know, the person is passed on. They're not going to complain about anything, really. But you will have someone who attended daily Mass. A daily Mass goer, receive communion every day, and then they pass on, and their family doesn't have a funeral Mass. They want something that happens at the cemetery or in the funeral home. This is a person who attended Mass every day of their living life, and now they are robbed of a funeral Mass. And why is it? Well, the family doesn't practice the faith. And so we don't honor the person who believed in the faith and died believing that faith with a funeral Mass, because we ourselves want to feel comfortable. That we will often see this, again going back to marriage, with in-laws who are interfering. Some marital problems do not originate in the couple and their communication and their love together. It's interference from, perhaps the mother-in-law, and the daughter-in-law can never be good enough for my boy. Or she doesn't do things the way I do it. Or the husband might say, "Why can't you make things the way Mama did?" So to speak. And vice versa. The man is never good enough for his little girl. And so constantly on the son-in-law, especially if they have different interests. We see it in the children. Now, the remnants or the vestiges of original sin are still in us when we're little. And so a child is the center of the universe. That's the way it's going to be for a few years. So if you're 2 years old and you're still the center of the universe, that's why they call it the terrible 2s. But it shouldn't be the terrible 20s. If they're still the center of the universe by the time they're 20 or 30 or 50, there's something wrong there. That is the narcissism. It's looking out for number one. Why does bullying occur? Looking out for number one. It really is. And so there's all these different ways we see that narcissism happens. One of the other grave sins is vainglory. We do good things so people can see us doing good things. That if I'm going to give you something, I want to have my name all over it. Or I want to get the newspaper there so they can see me giving you what I'm going to give you. There's none of this anonymity. There's none of this random acts of kindness that are supposed to be hidden. It's a narcissism. And narcissism is the root of every sin we have. And, we talk about Respect Life Month. All these sins against the dignity of human life are a result of narcissism. Us thinking we know better, us wanting to do what we want to do. People who are dissenting from the church, and they'll say, "I'm Catholic, but I don't believe what the church teaches." Why? Because I am my God. Narcissism. That I think I know better than what Jesus taught. And maybe the church needs to catch up with the times, like I have. It's narcissism. It all goes back to the root. So what does the second reading say? It says that Jesus became low. I mean, Jesus is God. If anyone could have entered the world and set the place on fire and really put people in their place, Jesus could have done that. But he emptied himself. It was humility with which he acted. And everything changed as a result of that. Imagine if people who came into the church, whether it's for First Holy Communion or confirmation, for the sacrament of matrimony, or even baptisms, for funerals. Imagine if we all checked ourselves at the door. We emptied ourselves for the most important thing that was getting ready to happen. Then we wouldn't come in and talk before Mass, making ourselves the focus. Then we would sing, not worried what people are going to think, whether we have a voice or not. Then we would pray, not worrying about whether we're being watched or not. And we would go out from these doors changed, not in a diminutive way like the people in the Metamorphoses, but in a new and greater way. Imagine if our motto was, I am third. God is first. Everyone else is second, and I am third. Immediately, egos would dissolve, the poor would be fed, wars would cease, we'd find a whole bunch of cures for diseases because people would finally work together. What would the possibilities be? If we could do that, there would be a new Metamorphoses that would have to be written. And it would be written about the Christian people. That instead of Christ emptying himself and becoming one of us, that we might empty ourselves and become like Christ.